Protein is in essence the building block of all of the cells in our body. It doesn't matter where your protein comes from. For me, it's much more important to have a fight about the quality of the protein source than to have a debate around animal or plant, which one's best. We are a generation of overfed but undernourished people. Protein is normally savory, so you have a packet of savory chips. You think you've satisfied that savory need, but it was actually a protein need that we had. From the age of 30, we are losing our muscle at a much higher rate as before that. So we need to start prioritizing building healthy and good skeletal muscle for the long term to be able to age as optimally as possible.
Welcome to smulcast, where we help you live a healthier and fuller life. I am Rolene Strauss, your host, and today is all about protein. If you've ever wondered exactly what protein is, how much you need of it, and when to consume it, you are at the right place. Today I am joined by Dr. Ledivia Strauss. She is a medical doctor with a special interest in integrative medicine, and her passion is optimizing the aging process and preventing disease as opposed to only treating it. Dr. Ledivia, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a bit more about who you are and why you have such an interest in today's topic.
Hi Rolene, and thank you very much for having me on the show. As you've mentioned, as I work as a medical practitioner in the integrative medicine field, which essentially means that we really look at a person as a whole, as opposed to just looking at a symptom and trying to give a medication to mask that symptom. So we look at a systems-based approach where we then take the person as a whole and help them reverse some of the metabolic challenges that they might already have, or help them live metabolically healthy to become the best version of themselves. And it's something I feel very passionate about because over my years and through the research I'm doing, I see how immensely important our daily lifestyle choices are. And that is something that I love to educate my patients on how to make daily lifestyle choices, but to do it consistently and sustainably, even while being a mum or an entrepreneur or a businesswoman. You need to be able to implement this daily for it to have an optimal effect in the long term.
I've been privileged to know you for quite some time, and some of my most amazing moments with regards to realizing how important health is and how you can improve your health through your lifestyle choices, I've discovered and learned from you. So thank you for that, and I'm excited for everyone to be able to gain wisdom from you today. One of the topics on most people's lips at the moment is protein. Let's start at the beginning. What exactly is protein and why is it important for us?
Thank you for the question. As you know, I've learned to fall in love with this molecule called protein, especially doing more and more research. I just realize how important it is and how amazing it is on the functions that it does in our bodies. So protein is in essence the building block of all of the cells in our body. Protein is made up of different amino acids, so they are in different sequences, and then they produce certain proteins to have certain functions in the body. As human beings, we need 20 amino acids to function optimally for our metabolic health, for our immune health, for hormone production, for every cellular function in the body. Of these 20 amino acids, 11 of them are non-essential, meaning that the body can produce it itself. But 9 of them are essential amino acids, and that means that we need to get them in through the food that we are eating. And of these 9 essential amino acids, 3 of them are called branched chain amino acids, and they are leucine, isoleucine and valine, and they are extremely important specifically for skeletal muscle synthesis, and we will get into the detail a little bit later. But our body really needs to make proteins constantly. If we stop protein synthesis, we die. And for that, the body is just amazingly built. So the liver synthesizes proteins 24 hours a day, non-stop, irrespective of whether you've had a meal, whether you had a training session. The liver produces proteins non-stop. Every person, whether you are 16 or 65, needs to make about 300 grams of new proteins every day to stay alive. And the good news is that each one of us turns over protein, the equivalent of the total protein in our bodies, 4 times a year. So certain proteins in the liver, like I said, gets turned over hourly. Certain proteins in the blood get turned over every 15 to 16 days. Certain proteins in the muscle get turned over every 30 to 40 days. And then there are certain proteins in the connective tissue that takes a bit longer, 30 to 60, up to even 90 days. And that is why healing sometimes takes a bit longer, because that's just the process of synthesizing new proteins. But the liver and the muscle needs these building blocks to be able to synthesize, and that is where our diet becomes so extremely important, because we are providing the building blocks for all the cells in our body. And that is why I gave you this wonderful news that we are turning over our proteins 4 times a year. So that gives our listeners the chance to really restart every day, to give them that chance to optimize protein synthesis in the body.
What exactly is muscle protein synthesis, and what happens if you don't consume enough protein to supply you with the building blocks to do this?
Okay, so like I said, protein synthesis in general is very important in the body, and the body makes proteins 24/7 around the clock. It happens in different tissues, like we said, the liver, and then also in the muscle. Other proteins gets made in the muscle in response to a meal that we've had, and that is what we call muscle protein synthesis, meaning we are building muscle. And as you have heard me say many times over, that muscle is a very metabolically active organ. We need robust, healthy skeletal muscle for immune health, for bone health, for activities of daily living, and to age as healthily and functionally capable as possible. Muscle is also the amino acid reservoir for the liver and the rest of the body to be able to continue making proteins with building blocks in fasting times, or when we are sleeping and not actually eating something. And this is something that's very important for patients also to realize. And I've got this nice story that I tell them, where if you have a fireplace in your house and you want to make nice fire to keep yourself warm, you have this basket with logs in front of the fire. So you keep putting on the logs on the fire to feed the fire. Once those logs are finished, the fire is dying, you are not calling your husband and saying, bring a table, bring a chair, bring a piece of the door, we need firewood. That's just silly. You're going to send your husband outside to fill that basket again and bring some new logs. And in our bodies, we actually have this amino acid reservoir, but we need to get the logs, the food from outside, to feed the fire. Otherwise, we're going to start using our furniture, and that is in the form of our muscle. And yes, we will use some of those amino acids. That's the way we are being made, but we need to make sure that we've got enough and we've got good quality muscle, and especially for women going on diets. Not only women, people going on diets or people following very restrictive diets, they will break down this muscle, and you need to re-stimulate and remake that. And the sad thing is that all of us are aging and declining, and from the age of 30 we are losing our muscle at a much higher rate as before that. So we need to start prioritizing building healthy and good skeletal muscle for the long term to be able to age as optimally as possible.
One of the most important lessons I've learned from you is that every bite you eat, you are giving information to your cells. You are telling your body what to do. So when it comes to protein, there are different types of sources that you can get your protein from. What is the most valuable or the optimal source of protein for us to eat in order for our bodies to keep on living and thriving?
Yes, this is obviously also a topic on everybody's lips, and I'm going to give a disclaimer to just tell you that I am an omnivore, so I do eat an omnivorous diet, meaning that I eat plant and animal-based proteins. I do not have a bias towards anyone specifically, and hopefully after today the listeners will realize why we shouldn't have this constant fight about which one should we eat, because it's possible with either a plant or an animal-based diet. And this is the research done with Dr. Don Layman, and in the 1990s he discovered in his lab that optimal muscle protein synthesis only gets stimulated when we get leucine. It's one of the essential branched chain amino acids. When we get that leucine of 2,5 to 3 grams per meal. Not in a day. With every meal that you consume, you need that amount of leucine to stimulate optimal muscle protein synthesis. All the amino acids get metabolized through the liver, apart from the 3 branched chain amino acids. So the leucine, isoleucine, and valine gets redirected to the skeletal muscle directly. And the moment that the skeletal muscle, it sees this leucine as a triggering response. And then it uses 4 processes by which it will stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So it's protein in the form of leucine, the correct amount, energy in the form of ATP, growth hormones in the form of insulin and IGF-1, and then also the stress in the form of the resistance training. And when all 4 of these are in a perfect balance, that is when mTOR gets stimulated. That is the complex by which new proteins will then be formed. And the interesting thing is that in kids, it doesn't work this way. In growing children, their muscle protein synthesis is very much dependent only on the hormone trigger, specifically insulin as a growth hormone. Whereas in adults, the moment we stop growing, and that's at the age of 25, it switches over from being solely hormonally driven towards these 4 complexes that I have explained now. And why I gave this beautiful physiological explanation is for the listeners to realize that it doesn't matter where your protein comes from as long as you get the 9 essential amino acids in the right amount that's needed for specific proteins to be formed, and for muscle protein synthesis to get that threshold of 3 grams of leucine. And this is where I would encourage listeners to really start looking at food labels, to start familiarizing yourself with, what am I consuming? Am I just slapping on the proteins and hoping and wishing for the best, or am I actually planning? And this is where the whole debate comes in, or where the big fight comes in. It is true that animal-based proteins have got a higher concentration of specifically the 9 essential amino acids, and they are in many instances more bioavailable. So you cannot simply take this amount of amino acids in an animal protein versus the same amount of amino acids in a plant-based protein. The plant-based one might be less bioavailable or less absorbed. And that is where the whole discrepancy then comes in, where to get your optimal protein intake on a purely plant-based diet, specifically vegans and vegetarians, they need to really meticulously plan. And it's doable. I've got patients that prefer to follow a strict vegan or vegetarian diet, but they really need to go and look into what protein sources are they using, because they normally need to combine different protein sources to have that full and complete protein. Whereas it's sometimes really just easy to grab 100 grams of steak or 150 grams of chicken breast and you get your full amino acid profile that you need for the day. And the other challenge comes between plant and animal based is for the same high quality and the same amount of amino acids in a plant-based diet, the volumes of food become so much more. Just to look at leucine, for instance, if you have, like say, 120 or 150 grams of steak, you will have your 3 grams of leucine, but in quinoa, the equivalent of that same amount of protein is 2.5 to 3 cups of quinoa, and that still is only half the leucine amount that you need. And it's quite challenging to finish 5 or 6 cups of quinoa in one sitting, so that's why they need to either add some soy or tofu or beans and have a good combination of proteins to be able to make sure. So for me, it's much more important to have a fight about the quality of the protein source than to have a debate around animal or plant, which one's best for the environment, which one's superior. We really need to start having a different conversation. And lastly on this topic is, what are your specific goals? Do you just want to not get sick or not get a deficiency, or are you actually optimizing your health, or are you working towards a certain competition that you are competing in? Do you have a chronic illness? So there are so many factors to take into account, and then also the state of your gut health. Are you absorbing what you are eating? And is it a very highly processed source, or is it a whole foods source. So it's a very nuanced conversation, but I hope that the listeners will get a little bit of a better idea of, it's not about I'm against animals or I'm against plants. What is the quality of the source of the protein that you are consuming?
The World Health Organization states that a minimum amount of 0.8 grams per ideal body weight is the amount of protein we should take in per day. But you've mentioned, do I just want to prevent illness or do I actually want to live optimally? So what is the optimal amount of daily protein that we should get?
That is also a challenging question in the sense of we don't have enough double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials to specifically state which amount is right for everybody. Again, it depends on your age, it depends on your goals, and it depends on the diet that you are following, the quality of your proteins. So where does the 0.8 grams per kilogram come from? Yes, that is just merely to not get muscle breakdown. That's just to not be sick. That's just to not have a deficiency. And I don't know about you, I'm not trying to eat and live just to not have a deficiency. I actually want to live optimally. And again, also, those studies were done, if you're really going to the nitty-gritty and the detail, there's a lot that comes from this, and it's not just a simple answer. Those studies were done where they were measuring the nitrogen balance, which might not be the perfect, accurate way of measuring it. And also, they assumed that the proteins the people are consuming everything will be absorbed and will be used. Whereas in the diet we are following nowadays, the modern diet, our protein is a little bit diluted with the ultra-processed diets we are following. So the quality of our proteins have become less. And that is why nowadays we actually suggest, and from most of the research, it's quite a wide range where they suggest that optimal should be between 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight in a day. But there's also a big but to that one is, what do I use as my body weight? Is it my current weight? And it's actually, there are two answers to that. So most people say that you need to take 1.2 to 1.8 grams multiplied by your ideal body weight in kilograms. So for instance, an overweight individual cannot calculate their protein needs on their current weight. They need to calculate it on the lower weight of which their ideal weight would be. The same goes for an underweight individual. A skinny female cannot simply calculate the protein need on where she's now. She needs to calculate it on what she's actually supposed to be weighing. And then they go further to say that the actual absolutely accurate weight calculated is to calculate your protein need with your lean body mass. And lean body mass just means it's your total body weight minus your fat mass. And so that's your muscle, your bone, your organs, and your water. You will only know that number once you've had a DEXA scan or an in-body measurement. And all my patients coming in and asking me what they should be eating, and first of all, we look at the goal, we look at the age, and then we look at what the actual body composition is. And I try to calculate it on their lean mass, because then you get a more accurate number. And then suddenly it becomes easier to reach your protein goal, because we look at all the influencers on Instagram, and it's wonderful that they're getting the message out there, but they tend to leave this little nuances out of there. So people just, I need to multiply 1.6 by my current body weight. So, oh my word, I need to consume 150 grams of protein in a day. How will I ever get to that? But if you go back a bit, no, take your ideal body weight or your lean body mass, then suddenly it's only 90 to 110 grams. Oh wow, that's doable. And yes, that's still optimal. And like I said, the most important thing to take into account when you are calculating your protein need is, are you getting that 3 grams of leucine per meal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis? Because otherwise, yes, the protein will still be used for all the other bodily functions, for the liver that's doing protein synthesis, but to specifically trigger muscle protein synthesis, we need that stimulus of the food that we're eating. And that is where it becomes important. Then look at, is it 1.2 to 1.8? If you want to preserve and build muscle, it's 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight. And everybody's now talking about that 1 gram per pound. In South Africa, we don't work in pounds, but 1 gram per pound just equates to 2.2 grams per kilogram. I find it's almost undoable for most people, but in the people specifically wanting to build muscle or competing, that is probably the goal that they should be reaching. But for me and you and the average person out there that are doing recreational training, we want optimal health, we want optimal hormone function, we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, we can probably go with anything between 1,2 to 1,8 gram per kilogram of ideal or lean body weight.
Okay. So let's talk about under-consuming protein, but also over-consuming protein. A lot of individuals feel like I have to get enough protein, so they just drink some protein shakes and eat some protein bars, but a lot of people don't get to that ideal, optimal amount of protein per day. What happens when you don't get to that ideal amount of protein per day?
There's a very interesting research that was done by Robenheimer and Simpson in the year 2000, where they discovered the protein leverage hypothesis. And that postulates that the body will keep you hungry and keep you wanting to eat until you've reached your minimum protein need for the day. And they've calculated that as 0.34 grams per pound. And it's roughly, I think, 0.7 or 0.8 grams per kilogram. So that's why some people following an extremely low-calorie diet or very restrictive diets just are hungry all the time, and you just feel you want to snack all the time. But give your body the protein it needs, get to that minimal amount, and suddenly you won't feel so hungry anymore. So it's still only a hypothesis, but it has since been, they've only done it in cricket studies, and then they went over to rat models, but they have also done it now in human studies, where it has been proven that your body will keep you hungry and keep eating until you've met that minimal need. And it's so true what you've said now. We are actually a generation of overfed but undernourished people, because we are consuming food that taste nice, that make us feel good. And this whole thing of your body is craving something protein rich. In our minds, protein is normally savory. So you have a packet of savory chips or a packet of savory crackers. So you think you've satisfied that savory need, but it was actually a protein need that we had. And that is why it's so important. And I don't want people to become obsessed and just, people say they want to retire their job and just focus on getting all their protein in a day, because it might feel like a constant work, but it's not that difficult. It's so doable when you learn to do it practically. And what I teach my patients, and we actually give them a handout with a list of, these are the food groups per portion, this is how you get 20 grams of protein in. And then they can decide, okay, so to get to my 100 grams in a day, I need 5 of these portions. And that can be 100 gram of chicken breast is a 20 gram of protein. 100 gram of beef is 20 grams of protein. A cup of full cream yogurt, 20 grams of protein. Like I said, 2.5 cups of quinoa, 20 grams of protein. 3 eggs, 20 grams of protein. Then you can decide, okay, so my need for the day is X amount. How am I going to reach that?
Mm. And is there a danger in over-consuming protein, taking in too much as opposed to under-consuming?
There probably is a danger, and I'm saying probably because I don't think the average person listening to this podcast is easily going to overconsume the proteins they're eating. So it seems like it's only when we go above 4 to 4.5 grams per kilogram per day where we're going to that danger zone of affecting our kidneys and our fluid balance. Yes, absolutely. Before you start following a very high protein diet, please consult with a knowledgeable practitioner, being a registered dietitian, a medical practitioner, a nutritionist. Just talk to somebody and make sure that it's safe for you to consume the amount that you are planning. But like I say, for the average person, from research, it seems like up to 2.2 or 2.5 grams per kilogram per day seems to be absolutely fine. And I want to actually encourage people to go and have a look at how much you really have to eat in a day to get to that amount. And none of us will, well, very few of us will easily overconsume the protein that we are eating. But I love this question also in the sense of, I have had patients that they've listened to this influencer, or they heard me say that you need to prioritize protein, and now they just start slapping on 2 patties on their burger. They're having 2 chicken breasts, they're having 5 eggs. So they are just putting on the proteins, but not at all paying attention to the rest of the plate consists of. So you need to look at your whole plate. What do you have on the plate? What are you taking away for you to be able to now have more protein? Because if you're simply adding, you're going to increase the amount of energy you consume in a day, and you will pick up weight. So you need to reconstruct your plate if you are going to increase your protein. And I don't know if you know, but the body has got the ability to change or metabolize the protein that we are consuming. 40 to 60% of that are going to being metabolized to glucose in the liver through the process of gluconeogenesis. So your carbohydrates will be replenished if you consume a very high protein diet. So if you are eating all your carbs, you're eating your protein, you're overeating, some of it needs to be stored. And unfortunately, it's going to be stored in the form of glucose. And if the glucose are not being used, that then gets converted into fat. And that is where patients then start picking up weight by simply adding protein. I said, no, but I heard that eating protein will make me lose weight. You need to be mindful of how are you increasing your protein in a day.
You've mentioned carbohydrates and protein, and a lot of people are of the opinion that you should eat carbohydrates with your protein. And I think a lot of us, when we think about carbohydrates, we think about, bread, pasta, things like that. But is this true? Do you need to eat your carbs with your protein?
Well, I'm not a registered dietitian, but I do see a lot of patients and I do read up a lot in this area. And yes, we definitely do need carbohydrates. It's not that your body will not stimulate muscle protein synthesis without the carbohydrates, but I want people to realize that veggies and fruit also have a lot of carbohydrates in them. When we talk about carbs, it's not only the refined carbs that's made of the refined white flour. It's actually having your protein with your robust meal of your veggies. Have your fruit. Don't be scared of that, because protein will not provide you with the fiber and all the vitamins that you can get from your plants, which then also have got all the carbohydrates. And there's this misconception that you have to immediately after you've had a training session replenish your glycogen stores because they are depleted. I know very few people who can really deplete their glycogen stores, because to really deplete your glycogen stores, you need to either fast for almost 48 hours or you need to have a tough training session at 75 to 90% of your max training capacity for 80 to 90 minutes. And only then will your glycogen stores be completely depleted. So I'm not saying that carbs are bad, but choose your carbs wisely and use the carbs that you are going to consume in the form of your veggies. That will then also supply the gut microbiome with all the amazing stuff it needs to grow and to help you with the absorption of your protein. So it's actually this mutually beneficial relationship. It should not be only vegan or only carnivore. I really think we should stop being so obsessive over the name of my diet and rather start looking at the quality of our diet. Is it minimally ultra processed? Is it whole foods? Am I consuming this whole colorful plate of different food groups that will then provide you with all the different vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that we do need?
I think you've explained so well how important protein is and how much protein we really need. How do you divide the protein between your meals? Can you eat it? I know it's difficult, but can you eat it all at the same time? Or how would you say, would you address the timing of your protein consumption?
That is also quite a nuanced and a loaded question. And again, I went back to the research and I wanted to really find proof on which is best. Is it just the total amount that counts, or is it just the timing of my meals that count? And it seems like there's a little bit of a difference between whether you're an elite athlete or just a normal person doing recreational activities and wanting to live a healthy life. So for the elite athlete that really focuses on building muscle and have a very specific goal, it seems like they will have more benefit if they consume the protein meal as close to immediately after they have finished their training. Whereas for the normal person, they say that the most important part is actually staying consistent with meeting your daily protein needs. So you can't have a perfect dietary protein intake today and tomorrow and the day after that only have half of it and then maybe have too much. It's the benefit comes in doing it consistently. And then as Dr. Don Lehman in his lab proved also that muscle protein synthesis gets activated with that 3 grams of leucine. It equates to about 30 grams of protein in a meal. And that muscle protein synthesis stays activated for 2 to 2.5 hours. making new proteins from in our muscle is an extremely energy rich and energy expensive process. So if the body would just continue, it would deplete us of all our ATP and we will not have more energy for all our other body functions. So cleverly, the body stops that muscle protein synthesis after about 2.5 hours. There might be still a little bit going on for the next 4 hours, but after 2.5 hours it gets shut down so that the body can still preserve some of the ATP. And that is then why it is suggested that it's more beneficial to have a new stimulus with another 30 grams of protein or 3 grams of leucine 4 hours after your first meal. And then we can go on in that sense. So that's why what I advise my patients, it's like I said, go and have a look at how much protein you are allowed to consume in a day, and then fit it into your fasting and feeding window, and fit it into your training window, because we used to believe that there's a very small anabolic window after training, and within 30 minutes, almost running from the gym, you have to consume your protein, otherwise you will not get the benefit. Luckily, that has been debunked also, and it seems like muscle protein synthesis can be stimulated for up to 48 hours after you've had a training session. It will definitely be blunted and not as effective as within that first 2 to 4 hours, but then it becomes less important when am I consuming protein and more about am I getting in my total amount and am I getting in high quality and the right amount of the right essential amino acids.
Let's talk about the bioavailability of the protein that we do consume. The amount of protein we eat is not necessarily used as it is within our bodies. So where does bioavailability come in, and how can we ensure that we eat protein that's more bioavailable for our bodies to use?
That is also a question that actually have a couple of things linked to that. So it depends on the quality of your protein source. Is it an animal or a plant-based protein? What are you eating with the protein? So it just means that the amount of amino acids that you are ingesting, is your body actually going to take it in and build from it what it needs to build? And that differs between different food sources. And then also, like I mentioned, the health of your gut is extremely important, because if you have got a highly inflamed gut, you consume way too much ultra-processed food, you have a dysbiosis, you are constantly bloated after you've had a meal, your body will not absorb that amino acids as properly as it's supposed to if you were to have a healthy gut. And that is why I say it's often advised and it's best to have a combination of protein sources. And I would really encourage listeners to go and have a look at how much protein is in which food sources. In things that we don't even think of, there is protein, even if it's a 2 gram or a 3 gram or a 5 gram. Those amounts do add up. And if we have different protein sources, that increases your body's ability to absorb that protein and to use it to build what's needed.
Why is the optimal amount of protein beneficial or needed for us to function optimally? What are some of these benefits of protein when we consume it in the right amounts?
Like we've mentioned, that protein is the building blocks of all the cells and all the functions in our body. So if we consume enough protein and we have this robust combination of the right amino acids, then we can have healthy bone, healthy skeletal muscle, a good immune system, optimal hormone production, and then also optimal functioning, just being able to show up to the people around us and just have an optimal healthy life and to just not become frail.
So the quality of life, but specifically the quality or the speed at what you age, is directly related to the amount of protein you get and what your body actually does with that protein.
It does play a huge role.
If there's one last piece of advice you would like to give to a listener today who would like to start optimizing their health through their protein intake, what would that one piece of advice be?
Stop obsessing over the calories you are consuming and rather focus on the quality of your meals and make sure that you are getting the building blocks you need to live a healthy and optimal life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ledivia, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge regarding today's topic with us. One thing that I truly admire and respect about you is that you actually walk your talk. And we can all learn from you in that regard. And to all of our listeners, I really hope that you've gained valuable insights and knowledge on why protein is important, the amount of protein you need, and when you should consume your protein for you to live a healthier and fuller life.